excited to be here to speak with you today. I never realized how boring I sounded until Emma read my bio, so hopefully this kind of makes you more excited about science and what scientists do. So today I'll be talking about World War Z, fact versus fiction, and specifically, could a zombie pandemic that happens in the movie happen in real life? Here we go. So who am I to talk about zombies? Well, I don't know anything about zombies because they're not real, but I do have scientific expertise in viruses. So my background, I actually went to UCSD for my bachelor's, and then I went to Michigan State for my PhD, and now I work at Salk as a postdoc, so that's what you do after you get a PhD. And when I was a graduate student, my dissertation actually was about a chronic viral infection in dairy cows. Cows get infections and people study them, so fun fact. And my research was actually about if vaccines worked as well in these cattle. So today I'll be talking about viruses, how they work, how they don't work, and how that relates to a zombie pandemic. So I kind of divided this talk in a way to sort of talk about the hallmarks of a zombie virus. So not only in World War Z, but a lot of zombie movies where zombieism is not sort of an inexplicable cause, but specifically caused by a virus. So the hallmarks that I chose are super fast symptom onset, transmission through vicious bites, 100% infection and death rate, and then violent desire for flesh eating. So we're going to walk through each of these 4 hallmarks, and I'm going to kind of give you fact or fiction. How realistic is it that a virus like this would exist in real life? So to start, super fast symptom onset, and I'm sorry if I'm pretty used to having a monitor in front of me, but I'm too short to stand in front of the podium, so I'll do my best to look at you all. But for a super fast symptom onset, in a zombie movie, we all know that a lot of the dramatic tension is when someone's bitten by a zombie, it's not like, oh no, you're gonna become a zombie in 2 weeks, right? You're just like, oh no, I have to kill you, but I don't want to, right? So is this how virus transmission really works? Well, spoiler alert, no, but why is that? So when we think about viral infections, there are actually these 2 stages that I want to talk about. The first is the incubation period. So that's the period of time between you getting the virus and it's in your body and it's replicating compared to the time when you actually start to show symptoms, which would be the disease stage. So it's this period of time where in zombie movies, it's like seconds or minutes. So I just want to give a super, super quick overview of viruses don't replicate that quickly. I mean, they do. But there are actually a lot of steps that are required for a virus to actually replicate. And that's because viruses can't divide without entering a cell within a host. So that's because they don't have the machinery required on their own. They have to actually sort of co-opt your machinery to divide. So there are 6 steps. So first, a virus attaches to the cell. So this would be like sort of knocking on a door. Then it actually has to enter the cell. It has to open the door. Then, so viruses have this special coat on them, that has to come off, then they can actually divide their genetic material, and then they have to put the coat back on, and then they can finally exit the cell. So all of this has to happen for a virus to replicate, and this does not happen in seconds. So let's talk about real viruses and how long their incubation times are for you to see kind of what's realistic. So the shortest one we have is the influenza virus, so that causes the flu. It's very common. And it has a very short incubation time that's 1 to 3 days. So I want to point out that this is on the order of days, not minutes, not seconds. Another virus that you've probably read about is the measles virus. It has a much longer incubation period, but still not super long, which is 9 to 12 days. And then finally, HIV would have an incubation time between infection to AIDS onset anywhere from 1 to 10 years. So, this is not realistic. A zombie virus would not be able to go from a zombie to a new person and make a new zombie in 10 seconds. It's not realistic. Okay, so the next hallmark, transmission through vicious bites. So how are viruses actually transmitted? Could a virus be transmitted through bites? So there are kind of 2 main camps for viral transmission. One would be indirect. So this is basically you need an intermediary between infected host to infected person. So this would be something like anything transmitted by a mosquito, that would be indirect contact. Excuse me. And then the other one would be direct contact. So this is like an infected person has to directly touch you or come in their infected tissue, shall we say, has to directly contact you for you to actually get the virus. So I think it's pretty obvious that biting would be direct contact. So in real life, kind of how does direct contact transmission of virus happen? So there are three major categories. The first is mother to fetus. So this is if a pregnant woman is infected, she can actually pass the virus to her fetus. That would be that kind of transmission. An example is the Zika virus. Another one is sexual contact. So this is fairly obvious, but anything that involves like genital to genital contact would transmit the virus that way. And then there's the catch-all non-sexual, which is everything else. And so some examples could be biting. So I have a few examples of different viruses here, and the most important one is rabies virus. So that is actually transmitted through bites. So, I get all nervous sometimes when I talk, excuse me. And so based on all of this, even though rabies is kind of cheating, there's no evidence that rabies has ever been transmitted through biting from one human to another human, but I still give it a pass, so this is possible. Number 3, so 100% infection and death rate. So what do I mean by infection and death rate? Well, if we think of it in sort of a linear fashion, you would start with a ZV positive zombie virus positive zombie, and they bite a human. So then this human becomes a zombie virus positive human. And in zombie movies, this is usually 100%, right? So if you're bitten by a zombie, you're screwed. Like, end of the road for you, right? And then after that, for this seconds to minutes long period of time, you're a human, and then you become a zombie. So I realize that zombies aren't really dead, they're the undead, but in this case, I'm calling them dead. And then this is also 100%. So how realistic is this that viruses actually infect everybody and they kill them all? Well, it's not. Thank God, right? I mean, it's completely ludicrous. So there are a lot of factors that control how high a transmission rate is of a virus, as well as how many people it kills. And I'm supposed to plug for, you can ask me questions after the talk, so if you want to know more, you can just ask me about it. But for some common viruses, let's look at the transmission and death rates. So these are all fairly famous. The first is influenza. The transmission rate is super variable, and this really depends on the sort of environment that flu is in. So, for example, 70% is if you're on an airplane. So don't be on an airplane with somebody with the flu, because that's no good. Luckily, influenza is not that deadly, but I really do want to point out that in the US, the death rate is quite low, but that still means that last flu season, almost 80,000 people died of the flu. So I just want to make it a point that just because the death rate is low doesn't mean that there's not a serious impact. So another virus is measles. You can see here that the transmission rate is really high. Measles is super, super contagious to people who don't get vaccinated for it. If you have a vaccine, this isn't such a worry. And then again, it has a pretty low death rate of 0.2%. Then we have some other viruses. So one that's pretty well known is HIV. So its transmission rate is also very variable. This is due mostly to different modes of transmission. So certain types of contact have a risk of less than 1%, where over 90% of people who, for example, receive a blood transfusion from people who are infected with HIV, the transmission rate for that would be over 90%. And then the death rate for people who are infected with HIV without treatment is quite high. So 80% or more of people who are infected and don't receive treatment will die. And finally, we have rabies, which also does not have a very high transmission rate, but wow, rabies is really bad for you guys. So there is evidence that people can survive without serious consequences, but the vast majority of people who get rabies and don't get treatment are gonna die. So if you think you get rabies, go to the doctor. So finally, the last hallmark, which is, really the real key to being a zombie, right, is that you want to eat people's brains. Are you really a zombie if you don't want to eat people? I don't think so. So, can a virus make you want to eat people's brains? Well, two things have to happen. First, the virus has to infect your brain. So that's step one. And then, if the virus infects your brain, it has to impact your brain in a way that actually changes your behavior. Viral infections of your brain are not that uncommon. A lot of different viruses can infect your brain, which is why I didn't have a fun little list about it, because there are a lot. It's not very common, but what is a good thing is that most viral infections of your brain just cause these really mild common symptoms. You don't have to go to the doctor. You'll clear it on your own. So basically, typical symptoms of having an infection. Unfortunately, if you're very unlucky, you can have severe complications, and one of those, here we go, confusion, agitation, hallucinations. It's kind of a stretch, but there is evidence that because the way your brain becomes inflamed during an infection can specifically impact parts of your brain that control your behavior, it is unlikely, but it is technically possible that a viral infection could make you want to eat people. But, for example, actually, the rabies virus does specifically cause sort of aggression and violence in infected people, so I give this one a pass. So in summation, first, super fast symptom onset. No, not realistic. Thank God. But yeah, this would not happen in real life. How about transmission through vicious bites? Yes, this could totally happen. This is a way that a virus could be transmitted. Some viruses are transmitted that way. What about 100% infection and death rate? Nope. Not happening. And finally, violent desire for flesh eating. While it's not likely, I give it a pass. So in summation, I hope you're all pleased to hear that if we generously round up, a zombie pandemic is possible. So with that, we're going to watch the movie. I hope you like it, or at least you are not super bored by it. And if you have any questions for me afterwards, just stay when the credits go. I'll scurry up here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Okay, thank you.